This is the brand new 13-inch iPad Pro M4 with the brand new Apple Magic Keyboard and the brand new Pencil Pro. And for almost $2,500, it got me thinking. In 2024, can the iPad Pro finally be your only computer? Or if you already have an iPad, is it worth upgrading to the brand new M4 iPad Pro? Let's talk about it. I'm an entrepreneur and I own a few different businesses, and I actually use the iPad more than I use my computer on a daily basis. 90% of the work that I do is done on my iPad, and every once in a while, when I have to, I go back to the $5,000 MacBook Pro that I spec'd out beyond belief just to do a few things. But first, let's talk about where I'm coming from. This iPad right here is my 11-inch iPad Pro M1 processor with the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil. I've had this since it came out and I use it all the time. It's still in great condition. It still works awesome. Yes, it's way more used than any other device, but everywhere I go, I bring it with me. I use it on planes, I use it in coffee shops, I use it in my car. I am always using the iPad for my everyday tasks. There were really three key things that made me want to switch, but as I've started to use it now, more reasons are starting to come to the surface of just how much of a nice upgrade it is. But let me tell you the three things that I primarily upgraded for. Number one was just the size. Since I use the iPad for my primary computer, I quickly find that the 11-inch just tends to feel too small for all the tasks that I'm doing with it, and specifically when I start multitasking and using more than one application at the same time, that 11-inch screen fills up really quickly, no question about that. And that's something that as I've used it more often as my everyday computer, I find more times than not that sometimes I just want to default back to my computer because of a bigger screen, and I wanted to see if I could find a balance in between that. Can I have a 13-inch model iPad Pro instead and be able to not have that be an issue? So far in my short time working with this, I definitely think that the 13-inch is a huge upgrade. It feels so much bigger, so much more like a MacBook Pro does to me, especially with the new Magic Keyboard. It just feels great. The screen feels so much larger than the 11-inch, even though it's only 2 inches, with a little bit smaller bezels. It feels really, really good. It feels much more like I wanted it to feel on a computer. And because of the fact that the new iPad Pro is lighter, that was a big consideration for me to actually move to the 13-inch. I previously had the 12.9-inch for a little bit before I went to the 11-inch, and it just felt so heavy and bulky that it just wasn't even fun to carry around, and it felt like I was actually carrying around a larger and heavier computer than my actual computer, even though it was an iPad. As soon as I read that this was going to be the thinnest device they ever made, and it was actually thinner than my 11-inch and actually lighter, plus the new Magic Keyboard being lighter, I finally felt like, hey, maybe I can go back to the 13-inch iPad Pro and not have to worry about the weight being a big issue. And absolutely, I can tell you without question, it feels like that. This, when it's in this case, absolutely now feels smaller and lighter than the iPad I previously carried, and that's very exciting to me because I don't feel like I'm carrying around the bulk anymore, but I still have all the power and size now in the 13-inch. Now, one of the features that I upgraded for is probably something most people don't care about, or maybe more people than I think, but I thought it was a huge deal, is the fact that the camera is now in the center. Now, to some people that may not seem like a big deal, but as someone who does use this as their everyday computer, I do a lot of Zooms, I do a lot of FaceTimes, I do a lot of consulting when I'm out and about. And I hate having to use my phone because it's too small, but I refuse to use the iPad because if you've ever had a FaceTime with someone on an iPad and they're looking at you here and totally off to the side because of where the previous iPad camera was, it just looks awkward. Everything about it looks awkward. It's a terrible experience for the person watching. So I would constantly have to either use my phone for that Zoom meeting just so that I could see people that way and they'd look at me naturally, or I'd have to use my computer. And now that's finally solved because we have that camera there right on the center where it should be. And because most people use the iPad, in my opinion, like this regardless, it makes more sense to have it there. Really, really excited. That was a huge deal to me, actually. Beyond some of the spec bumps was the fact that those little features that are useful to me in everyday use become more useful when I'm actually using the iPad now. That's great. So screen size moving to the 13-inch, that camera being in landscape mode is huge for me. The new Apple keyboard is really, really great for me. The new Apple Pencil improvements were another one that really made me want to switch. I love the Apple Pencil. What I love about the iPad in general is that it is a note-taking device for me as well. I take tons of notes and I do screenshots and annotations on stuff, and I use the iPad all the time for stuff that I literally am kind of replacing a pen and paper with. And because I use it so much for that, there are things about this new Apple Pencil Pro that are really, really nice upgrades. Being able to switch tools now when you're taking notes to squeeze and do highlights and different stuff, and being able to do the barrel roll if you're more of a drawer, and just even having it hover over top as you're going through things on the iPad. It's really nice. This is not the reason I upgraded, but absolutely when you add those into the other things, it's nice having this pencil be even more useful because I do use this so much. So I mentioned earlier that 95%, or maybe I said 90, whatever. Most of the time, I do all my work on an iPad, and there are a small percentage of things that I end up defaulting back to the computer for instead. And I think most of it lies in one major thing that I feel like the iPad needs to continue to get better at, and it's gotten a little better, but still for me, it's file management. One of the things that I do in the work I do is I sometimes post the content for our clients, or I post my own content, whether it's on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever it is. I take videos that have been created and I post them places, and I do batch posting, right? Whether it's for me or for clients, I take a bunch of files that have all been downloaded, whether it's through Frame.io or Google Drive, whatever it is. I download them all, and then I schedule them out on different platforms, and I do that on a regular basis. And the file management, when it comes to how I do that when I'm normally doing it on my computer, is as simple as selecting all those files in Frame, downloading them just to a quick folder on my desktop, posting them where I want to, deleting them off the desktop, moving on. It's nice and quick. Or I just throw it in a folder really quickly, conveniently, however I want to do it. But when it comes to file management on the iPad, I still feel like it's gotten better, but it still is the biggest gripe to me when it comes to just the ease of going back and forth between the files. Now, maybe I just need to really force myself to do it more, but I find when I'm doing tasks that require a lot of file management, downloading things, moving things, putting things in different places on my server, on the computer, on Google Drive, on all those things, it still is easier to me to do on the computer. That also applies to video editing. One of the biggest reasons that I default to video editing on the MacBook Pro is not just because Final Cut Pro is better in my opinion, because it's more of an actual Mac OS application versus an iPad OS application, but file management is annoying when you're putting all the actual files on your iPad versus putting them on like an SSD, which also you can do now with there, but you have to plug the SSD in, and I usually just put the stuff on my desktop. I know this sounds confusing, but like it's the file management thing just for some reason still feels like bulky to me in comparison to how I do it on the MacBook Pro. Maybe I just need to work through it a little bit. And possibly even bigger than file management, one of the number one reasons that anyone is going to potentially default to a computer as their main choice versus an iPad is actually just availability of the app that they are using, the way that they want it to be used. The iPad has an M4 processor inside it with plenty of RAM. It's incredibly fast in all aspects, and it's actually faster than most of the MacBook Pros that have been out for the last 2-3 years. So performance isn't the issue with the iPad. What tends to frustrate people with the iPad, and I can agree with, is that it's an iPad OS compared to a Mac OS, which means you have a different application that runs on here than that runs on the computer. So for example, in my world, I spend time when I am on my computer editing videos in Final Cut Pro. They make a Final Cut Pro for the iPad, but It is not the same as Final Cut Pro on the Mac. Yes, you can cut videos, you can edit videos, you can color videos, whatever, but the way you do it is not the same. The keyboard shortcuts can't be customized on the iPad. The way that you move your workspaces around and have save workspace cannot be customized on the iPad. The way that you actually edit audio or color or any of those things is just different. So as much as the iPad can handle anything you throw at it, and it would have no problem handling that full version of Final Cut, for some reason, it's a different application and they can't just make it the same, and they don't make it the same. That's frustrating to me because as someone who really preaches efficiency and is incredibly fast editing in Final Cut Pro on the computer, I cannot edit as fast on here, not because I'm not used to it, but because I can't customize things the same way that I would on the computer. That goes for a lot of applications, things like Photoshop or Lightroom or potentially Excel if you're a person, or even Microsoft Word or different things that you use. While they have versions of those apps for the iPad, they are not exactly the same. So if you're a person that is super efficient with these programs, you're actually having to potentially learn it a different way and to do it differently on the iPad than you actually would have to on the version that you're used to on the Mac or even a PC. So that can be frustrating to people. There are also certain applications that just do not exist at all on the iPad that I use all the time. Something like Isotope RX Advanced that I use for audio editing, for example. There's not even a version of that for the iPad. So even though, once again, this iPad could handle the processing of it because it's actually faster than my actual computer, I can't do it. So it forces me to have to still keep a MacBook Pro because there's applications that don't work how I want, aren't available at all, or just have to be done so differently that it is not even saving me time anymore, and it's just quicker to go to the computer. So yes, there are certain limitations when it comes to the iPad compared to a MacBook Pro, but I think the pros of an iPad and some of the reasons that I really love the iPad are absolutely bigger pros than the small amount of cons. But let me talk a little bit about why I absolutely love the iPad and things that I feel like just nothing else can do as well, which to me makes the iPad the greatest device ever to have as your primary computer. In no particular order, number one is instant accessibility, instant on with cellular connectivity. The amount of times that I am somewhere and I simply need to do a task quickly and I don't want to do that on my phone, being able to open up my iPad, instantly have it connected to cellular and be able to do anything I need to is so convenient. Yes, I can hotspot my phone and use my computer, but I have to open my computer. I have to wait for the hotspot to engage. I have to worry about data limits if that's an issue for you. Sometimes it doesn't even want to connect to the phone. All the annoyance of that versus just opening this up, it's instantly on and I can do my stuff. Also, another thing I like, and I've touched on it already, is the user experience with the iPad. The iPad can do so many things that a computer cannot. Yes, in its simple form, if you use it just like this and you never take it out of the keyboard case, it kind of acts like a computer and you can use it like you'd want. But you can also do things that you can't do on computers, like having just the device be by itself and being an incredible device to watch movies on, or to just use as a drawing device if you're an artist, or if you're a musician to use it as a brainstorming device to write music, or whatever it is. You have an incredible note-taking device with an Apple Pencil. You have a canvas to draw. You have so many things that a computer can't do, and yet you still have this on your computer. So you have a lot more versatility with the iPad compared to kind of having a computer really only do one thing. Even something as simple as having a touch screen to be able to interact with when you're doing different things inside of apps while using it in its computer form is really convenient for certain apps. The pencil, it is an amazing tool to be able to take notes, but also it's an amazing tool if you're using programs like Photoshop to be able to edit photos and to use this as brushes in your photos in Photoshop. And if you're a college student and you're taking notes on your iPad, it is so good at doing a lot of different things that a computer can't do. And it's so good at doing those extremely well. The iPad is so powerful. The screen is so gorgeous. The battery life is great that you can use this device all the time, and you're not feeling limited by what it can do. The iPad also has a camera on it, which obviously, no, I'm not a big fan of like the touristy looking thing that you're holding an iPad and filming things or taking pictures. But from a work perspective, with what I do in my pressure washing business, maybe, or even some things at Scaling Creative, being able to be taking notes of something and potentially scouting a location for filming, or just if you do work in real estate, whatever it is, and this is your tool that you're bringing around, being able to take photos and just insert them directly into the work that you're doing, the documents you're doing. It's convenient that you actually have a computer that has a front-facing camera and a back-facing camera, a very good quality camera at that. And even though I don't prefer taking pictures with it, I have used the iPad to take pictures of things that are related to my work, and that might be really convenient for you and something that you're not going to be able to do with a laptop. Now, can the iPad replace your everyday computer as your primary computer? And I think the answer is, for most people, most people, 95% of people potentially, the answer is yes. This is not necessarily going to replace your work computer, because most likely if you work for somebody, you have certain applications that you have to use. You potentially have certain computers you have to use, and we're not necessarily talking about that. But if you have the flexibility to choose what you want as your personal computer outside of work, or maybe you're a business owner like me, depending on the tasks that you do, this may be plenty enough for what you want. Because if you're doing what most people do on their computers on a regular basis, other than that main application they may be in for the type of work they do, your own personal computer much more often is probably for email, internet, videos, maybe some Microsoft Word, some Pages, some Google Docs, whatever. And all those things are going to work on here, no problem. Even if you're a presenter who speaks around the country, Keynote is outstanding on the iPad. PowerPoint exists for the iPad. You have USB-C that you can connect monitors to. You have USB-C that you can connect SD cards to if you're a photographer that wants to import all your photos and edit there. I think you could totally use this device as your only device if you're a photographer, because Photoshop and Lightroom are all really, really good for it. I think this is not going to necessarily replace your computer if you do tasks that are very reliant on an application that is not available on the iPad, or that isn't the same as what you need it to do on the iPad. So yes, there are going to be certain things that it's not ideal for. But honestly, I don't really think at this point that Apple's trying to say that it can replace it for those people. They're selling to the mass market, the 90%, the 95%, that the iPad is a super powerful tool. Now the question always comes, if the 13-inch iPad Pro with cellular and things I talked about, and that keyboard and the pencil, is nearly $2,500. Does it make sense to get the iPad Pro rather than, let's just say, the MacBook Air, for example? The new MacBook Air, for example, has the new M3 processor rather than the M4 processor, but that will be M4 soon enough. This was the first device to have it. It's going to have 3 USB-C ports compared to 1. It's going to have a MagSafe adapter with better battery life than the iPad overall. It's going to do a lot of things the iPad can't from a software perspective, because it's not running a iOS app store. It's running an actual Mac, legit Mac operating system. So you can run any apps on that, while simultaneously being a 13-inch with basically the same power that the iPad has, for half the price. Starts at $1,099. So is it worth spending double the amount of money on an iPad that has some limitations but can do things that the other computer can't? I think, honestly, it's hard to answer that question, because I think it depends on the work that you're doing. Now, it's worth noting, when I say that the MacBook Air is half the price of the iPad itself, with no Apple Pencil and no Magic Keyboard at all, is only a little bit more money than the MacBook Air. But the MacBook Air has a keyboard and a trackpad, and you can use it like an actual computer. So when you add on the things that make it more like a MacBook Air, which is, in my opinion, a great keyboard case with a trackpad with keyboard on it, then you're talking about an additional $350 for just this keyboard alone. So you end up being nearly $2,500 for all these additional things, plus the cellular and all that. So it absolutely is more money to get a side-by-side comparison of the same thing. They both have keyboards. They both have a trackpad. They both can operate and function like a computer. So hopefully that makes sense. The iPad itself, 13-inch model with cellular, 512 gigs, is only $14.99. But you got to add those things for it to be actually a comparison to the MacBook Air. At least in my opinion, I couldn't do that. I use it primarily like this. Okay,